Sådan, Lone, så er vi der. Jeg skal lige have mikrofonen hen. Hvordan går det?
Det går godt. Hvordan går det med dig?
Jo, jeg synes egentlig, jeg har det fint. Jeg har ufattelig travlt, altså, men for mig så bliver corona bare ved med at være spændende. Og jeg snakkede med en af mine venner i dag, som sagde, jamen er du ikke bare ved at være træt af det? Og det er jeg simpelthen bare ikke. Altså, det er ligesom, jeg er blevet en mand med en sag, ikke?
Det er godt. Ja, jeg har jo haft den her sag i 30 år, så jeg på mig.
Prøv at se her, Lone.
På en god måde. Der kommer sgu Kai.
Hej, Kai.
Jo.
Hej, Kai.
1 second.
Ja, okay. Det er så sjovt. Kai, jeg er helt sikker på, at Kai ikke ved, at vi er live. Men Kai, han er en af Islands største eksperter i coronavirus. Og som du siger, Lone, så er Island det nye sort.
Det er det simpelthen. Alt, hvad vi vil vide om den her pandemi, det kommer nu ud af Island, på grund af, at de tester så meget, og de er cool på alle mulige måder i Island, og de ser på viruset genetisk og alt muligt, så det er meget spændende med det der, vi skal høre i dag.
Okay. Og så prøv at se her, Lone, hvad vi kan.
Nej.
Det her, det er lige nu i Statsministeriet. Og det er fordi, at Frederiksen har valgt at holde pressemøde lige præcis her kl. 16. Så jeg tænkte, vi lige kunne se med for at se, om der sker noget spændende. Man ved sådan inden for det første stykke tid, om der ligesom er noget stort nyt. Ikke?
Hvad tror du, Kai vil sige til det?
Det aner jeg ikke.
Men hvorfor er de så sent på den?
Hej Kai.
How are you?
How are you? Kai, we are watching at the press conference here. It's live in Denmark. We just see the first 2 minutes to see if the Prime Minister has something interesting and new to say.
When has the Prime Minister ever had anything interesting to say?
We have a good one. We can't hear, Asger.
You cannot hear it?
No.
Damn it. Okay, you can't hear it. I thought this was brilliant, but
it was a good idea.
It was a good idea on paper.
Whenever your Prime Minister cannot be heard, she looks a little bit brilliant, doesn't she?
You are very skeptical towards the politicians, Mr.
No,
Stefansson.
I'm not skeptical. I'm fairly realistic when it comes to politicians.
Okay. Kai Stefansson, welcome. We are live now. And thank you very much that you will participate. And as our viewers can hear right now, this will be in English. Og jeg er ked af, at det kommer til at være på engelsk i dag, men sådan er det, og det er bare, fordi det bliver ekstra godt. Kai her er en fantastisk gæst. Mr. Kai, this was just in Danish, I'm sorry very much.
Yeah,
Will you introduce yourself, Mr. Stefansson?
My name is Kai Stefansson. I'm a medical doctor and a geneticist, and I run a biotechnology company that is called Decode Genetics.
Okay.
And I've been doing that for the past quarter of a century.
Okay. So, and today we want
to... I don't know if you know this, Asger, but this is a very world-famous operation that has been going on for a lot of time. I had my eyes on Decode for many years. So yes, I know it's cool.
Why is it world-famous?
Why?
Why is it so famous?
Oh, you see, we started to do genetics on a whole population before anyone else did. We started to gather a lot of information about the health and diseases of people in Iceland, matching it with information on the genetics, which has then subsequently become a model that people have been implementing all over the world. That is probably one of the main reasons. We have also found mutations in genes that contribute to an awful lot of diseases. So we have been fairly productive scientific operation for a long time. Yep. And since we were always a little bit ahead of the rest of the field, some of the things that we were doing were considered controversial when we were doing them. Now everyone in the world is doing them, so they have ceased to be controversial and therefore do not catch quite as much attention today as they used to do.
Okay, so you are a front
runner. I can tell you,
runner.
Asger, from the world of pandemiology, I worked with your colleague Magnus Gottfredsson for a long time, and on the Spanish flu pandemic, for example, and we used the decode and the Icelandic population data to look at the genetic risk factors. Like, are some people more at risk for dying of pandemic flu than others? You did that with the data coming out of Iceland.
Let me correct you. You didn't do it with data coming from Iceland. We did it with data coming from Iceland, helping you guys to put it together.
Okay, you see, Mr. Kai Stefansson,
you are right. You are. I stand corrected. It was Magnus's study. You are right. It's a long time ago.
It is very important because we are custodians of data. All right, we don't own any data, and we cannot provide others access to the data, and we can only use the data in keeping with the permissions we get from the National Bioethics Committee. And therefore, it is not because I want to thump my chest over this. I just want to make it absolutely sure that people understand that we were not violating the laws.
Okay. Oh, I was just trying to make the point that very cool research came out of Iceland that we couldn't have done anywhere else. And we is the big we of the pandemic world.
Yeah, but then you can imagine yourself. We have been working on the pathogenesis of all kinds of diseases for a quarter of a century in at Decode. And we have not just been using genetics, we have been using transcriptomics, we have been using proteomics, etc. And one of the things that when you begin to study a disease, the first thing you usually do is to ask the question, what question has yet to be answered when it comes to this disease? And then all of a sudden today, in our laps, falls a disease where every single question is unanswered. So in the middle of the famine, we have a feast, with this opportunity to take all of the methods we have been working with and developing over the past 25 years to direct at a disease that is completely, basically unknown. And it's amazing how much knowledge, new knowledge, has been gathered over 3.5 months about this disease. So in spite of the difficulties in having this epidemic, it is giving us incredible opportunities. And we are both saddened by the epidemic, and we are extremely grateful for having an opportunity to work on it.
Okay, I will just say here that Mr. Kai Stefansson, you are here because Icelandic data on the coronavirus is the new black. That is the words of Lone, the professor that you see in the middle of the screen. What you know is extremely interesting, I hear. So we are looking forward that you will tell us this, and we want to hear your thoughts on what we are doing in Denmark. And just let me say to viewers right now, if something interesting is coming out of the press briefing with Mette Frederiksen, just write it in the commentary below, and then we will say it to the rest that looks at this thing. So, Mr. Kai Stefansson.
Let me just tell you the story of this epidemic in Iceland as I see it. I mean, it isn't until towards the end of December last year that the SARS-CoV-2 virus was basically discovered, or the disease that causes it. And in the very early January, it was isolated and sequenced. And in the beginning of January, or by the middle of January, the world was beginning to learn about an epidemic that was developing in China. But somehow the attempt to put it in the context of their healthcare in the various countries of the world, it really didn't happen except in Iceland. We started to screen for the virus in the 31st of January, and we screened for a whole month before we found the first patient. And then about 7th of March, I was driving to work one day and I was listening to news on the radio from the epidemic in China. And people were throwing around all kinds of numbers, for example, about the lethality of the virus, insisting that 3.4% of those who would get infected would die from the virus. And I couldn't understand how they could calculate this out without a denominator. They didn't know the distribution of the virus in the community. They were only aware of the virus in those who already were sick. and or were at very high risk. So I proposed that we should screen in the population in general, and it took us about 5 days at Decode to set up a lab that could have a high throughput screening using a PCR method, and we turned our clinic into basically a sample collection site for people coming for screening. And mind you, the healthcare system continued to screen the people at high risk, people who were already with signs and symptoms, and those who were in contact with them. We started to screen in the beginning by offering everyone a test for free if they would come to our station. And subsequently, we also recruited some random sample from the population. And what is interesting is that we not only screened for the disease, for the presence of the virus, we also sequenced the virus from every single person diagnosed. And when you look at the virus, this coronavirus number 2 or SARS coronavirus number 2, it has a relatively low mutation rate. But it has infected so many people in the world that it has had an enormous opportunity to mutate. And what it does, of course, is that it mutates wherever it goes. So gradually, there is a barcode or a signature or mutations that characterize specific parts of the world. For example, there is a string of mutations or string of variants that we call a haplotype that is fairly characteristic for Austria, another for Italy, a third for England, a fourth for the west coast of the United States, etc. And what this barcode does for us, when we sequence every single one who is diagnosed in Iceland, is that it allows us to determine the country of origin of the infection in every individual in the country. And what is more, it allows us to track the virus as it is spreading in society. Because let's say if Peter gets infected and he has been in contact with John and Mary, both of whom are infected, we can determine whether he got infected by John or Mary by sequencing the virus from all 3 of them. And in the beginning, the first cases coming to Iceland were coming from ski vacations in the Alps, either in Italy or Austria. And the authorities were very focused on containing the spread of the infection from these early carriers of the infection into the country. But it's interesting, in the very beginning, almost all of the cases that were found by the healthcare system that was focusing on people coming from this region, almost all of them had these haplotypes that characterize Italy and Austria. But when we started our population screening, the outcome was totally different. A large percentage of the ones we found through the population screening came, for example, from England, right, or from Great Britain. So it's absolutely clear that the spread of the virus in Great Britain was much greater in the early days than the people there realized. But what the authorities in Iceland did, and did it in a very effective way, to the extent that I can state with certainty that we have the epidemic under certain control in Iceland. The number of cases that are new cases that are diagnosed each day are far fewer than the ones that are declared short, etc. And actually the spread of the disease in the population in general has been decreasing. It has been decreasing, by, or we can say that the infectivity of the virus in the community since the 13th of March has been decreasing about 2% a day. But what we have done fairly effectively in Iceland, or the authorities have done fairly effectively, is to put every single one diagnosed in isolation and tracking the contact. And that is the key, tracking the contact of those infected and putting them in quarantine. And we have not taken any sort of draconian measures. We have been so fortunate that the government of Iceland has left this completely in the hand of the specialists, of the public health authorities. For example, we didn't shut the borders of our country, which I was saddened to learn that the Danes did, that the politicians decided to do that in spite of pushed back by the public health authorities. We have kept the elementary school and the childcare centers open. We have put a ban on gathering of more than 20 people. We have kept the stores open. We have encouraged people to work from home and keep a social distance of 2 meters. And the outcome out of all of these is that we seem to have the epidemic under a fairly good control, and we are seeing the cases becoming fewer and fewer. And
can I ask you something here? Because what you're saying right now, we have the same debate in Denmark. Should we do this? Should we start testing, isolating, quarantining a lot more, and then open up the society? A lot of experts will say to this in Denmark, it can't be done. The virus is too widespread in Denmark. What would you think?
That is an opinion, all right? That's an opinion. And I have to admit, I would not grant much value to that opinion. The way in which this works usually in science, that you can put together hypotheses, and the hypothesis put together by the best of them, probably in 95% of the cases turn out to be wrong. Perhaps it is too widely spread, but the only way you can find out is by testing widely. And no one is going to be hurt by that. I mean, you have an extraordinarily resourceful country. You have spectacularly talented scientists in a lot of universities. The only thing you need to do is just to draft the universities, call them to duty. And this is a moment when the academic community can demonstrate to the people of Denmark that it is worthwhile building up such a community and keep it competent and well equipped. I mean, why aren't the academic labs at the University of Copenhagen, at Aarhus, etc., why aren't they now screening for the presence of the virus in the population? Why aren't they there to help containing this? So I think it is easy for you. It is like drinking water for you guys to test widely in your society and use reasonable measures like quarantines and isolation to contain this. And saying that it is too late is just not right. It is bullshit.
Okay, Lone, you are a bullshitter.
Well, are you aware that several countries actually had trouble with just simply getting the tests up and running and working in the beginning of the pandemic? Not only in certain places in Europe and Denmark, but also in the United States, and it's still a problem.
Listen to me. We are sitting here in a small, desolate rock in the North Atlantic, all right? We could do this in a few days. And we have tested now 10% of the population. Yeah. There is absolutely no excuse for not doing this. Absolutely no excuse. You're well equipped. You have enormous talent in your country to do this, and there's no excuse for not doing it.
So you are saying that the Danish authorities and experts are bullshitting?
I think they are taking a defeatist view. I mean, I have enormous respect for your experts and the people who are working on this in Denmark. But I think that they are taking a little bit of a defeatist view of this. You know, the issue here is that it would be very difficult to set up testing stations, you know, putting them up from ground zero. But you have so many good laboratories in your country that on a usual day are doing something totally different. But testing for this virus is very simple by using a PCR test. The only thing you need to do is to collect samples, isolate RNA, and then do a PCR. And there certainly is everything you need to do it widely in Denmark already existing there.
Mr. Kaj Stefansson, I'm sorry that I interrupted your story about how the virus has been dealt with in Iceland. Please continue.
I mean, one of the remarkable things when you look at this virus is the diversity in the clinical picture. You know, you have people who say this was just like a mild cold, to people who are put on respirators and in intensive care units and die. Women are less likely to get infected than men. And if they get infected, their disease is not as severe as the disease of men. Children are less likely to get infected, and if they get infected, their disease is milder than in men. And the big question is, what is it that generates this enormous clinical diversity? And when you think about that, there are, of course, many, many possibilities. One of them is that the virus, even though the mutation rate is low, I mean, we are publishing a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine this evening, and there we describe 528 mutations in the virus. 393 of them have not been described outside of Iceland. And these are mutations that affect, for example, the spike protein, the protein that is critical for the entry of the virus into the cells of the body. And one possibility is that this enormous sequence diversity in the virus is yielding several strains of the virus that have different, that cause different disease with different severity. That is certainly a possibility, although I want to emphasize there is not a shred of evidence in support of that hypothesis. The second one is that this is due to the genetics of the patients, that we may have different genetic susceptibility for the virus. Again, there is not a shred of evidence in support of this, but we, together with our people all over the world and collaborating, for example, with people in Denmark and in Finland, looking at this, both of these possibilities. And it is incredibly important to figure out what it is that generates this enormous diversity in the clinical response, and keep in mind that exactly this diversity in the response is what makes this virus particularly dangerous. Because if you take viruses in general, when they mutate, there is a positive selection for increased infectivity and less virulence. So it serves the survival of the virus, that it becomes more, that the infectivity increases, but the disease it causes becomes milder. All right. So there is you can always be optimistic that when the virus is mutating, it will eventually find some sort of a balance where it spreads more widely and causes a less serious disease. But this virus has found a way around this. In most people, it causes relatively mild disease, so it can spread widely. But then there is this subpopulation that is so vulnerable that it kills. So in that sense, it is pretty scary. We have seen individuals who are heteroplasmic for the virus, individuals who have a virus with and virus without a mutation. And in one such instance, we have found that the people who catch the disease from that person only contain the virus with a mutation, which is most likely due to coincidence, but could mean that a mutated virus is more infectious than a non-mutated virus. Just to give an example of how our exploration of the structure of the virus is beginning to generate hypotheses that we are eager to test.
Okay. So this is a lot of. Okay, Lone. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would say something about this severity of the disease. You are one of the few countries that had tested at the population level. I hear you're also going to test random aspects of the population instead of people who come with their symptoms. What is your feeling about what's the risk of getting in intensive care based on Icelandic data? What's the risk of mortality amongst those infected?
There are about 1,711 diagnosed cases in Iceland. Mm-hmm. If you take the population distribution into it, once that the projected cases on the basis of our population screen, it looks like the lethality of this is somewhere around 0.4%.
Yeah. I just wanted to say how important that is compared to when we hear, for example, the reports that if we don't do a lot of things, we get like 1 in 20 people will end up with very severe illness. That's the information we have gotten from the WHO on C-SPAN, for example. That it's really not, and this is what we call the mørketal in Danish. The dark numbers. It's really important that we get the full extent of the clinical spectrum, and you're doing just that. It's very cool.
And listen to me. The only way in which you will be able to demonstrate that that these are the exaggerated dark stories. The only way in which you will be able to do that is to do population screen. And even if you're only thinking about the kind of a knowledge you will have coming out of this, it's extraordinarily important for you to do this population screen. Otherwise, you will really never know what was taking place in Denmark. And in a country,
think we're sort of getting to that, but we're going to use antibody screening to do this in a systematic way in blood donors and other populations. What are you doing? Something like that? Just looking for the part of the population that had the infection at any point in time.
We are already doing population screening. We are doing screening. We have started by doing screen of those who have recovered from a disease. All right, we are looking both at IgM and IgG. We are doing some screening of serum that was collected 1 and 2 years ago, just to see whether there is, number one, whether there is any evidence of something like this in our population before this outbreak. And we are doing as wide population screen as we can. It is not quite as swift as doing the screen for the virus, because you can lead people through a clinic very quickly in taking the nasal and oral swabs. It takes a little bit more to take blood, but we are doing this at the maximum speed we can generate. And it's going to be very exciting to look not just at antibody against any viral protein, but particularly against the binding domain of the spike protein, etc. And also, you have to keep in mind that if we allow ourselves the luxury or look outside to the boundaries of our affluent countries and look, for example, to Africa, where there is no way in which you can use screening to prevent spread, because even though you would screen, they don't have the infrastructure to track contacts or put people in quarantine, etc. So the only thing that is going to help Africa is if we develop some kind of a treatment. And the only drugs that can be developed that do not require a proof of a therapeutic hypothesis are therapeutic antibodies, because the antibodies are the ways in which our bodies heal from a disease like this. We are developing neutralizing antibodies against the virus. And if we could pull out of the blood of patients, memory B cells or plasmablast, and on the basis of the immunoglobulin genes in these cells, develop therapeutic antibodies, that would be the only way in which we could really help Africa. And we are already in collaboration with people in America in our attempt to develop therapeutic antibodies, and that's very exciting also. But this is an interesting period to go through. I mean, have you noticed that there is now no difference between Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, Saturday? This is just one amorphous block of time. It becomes very strange.
Like that,
okay. Yeah. Can I just interrupt for a small moment? You said that the mortality is in your view, your best estimate is 0.4%.
I was calculating it here as I was sitting here, and I think it is not far from being right.
I had just had my calculator in my mobile phone. I was just using it while you were talking. That's
unfair. You have a calculator?
But because what I'm calculating is how many people in Denmark will die if 60% of our population catches the disease. we are discussing, is this the way to go? It's inevitable that 60% will have it. Let's just make it happen as fast as possible without the health.
It looks like the Swedes are trying to do something like that, and I think it is really distasteful. The way in which you can do this, it's the question of how to generate herd immunity, all right? And you do not do it by considering everybody equal. There are groups in society that are particularly susceptible, that need to be protected with everything you have until this epidemic goes over. Because there is, as I said before, there's a tremendous diversity in the clinical response. And in the elderly and those who have pre-existing diseases are particularly susceptible, and we have to find a way to protect them.
Yeah, but the number here that I get on my calculator is this. This is the amount of Danish dead people if the mortality is what you say it is, and if we reach an infection of 60%.
You are not going to have 60% of the people get infected in this epidemic.
Why not?
Because you are taking some measure to contain the disease, and I'm sure that even though even the results are not screaming at you at this moment, I'm sure that this is going to have significant effect, right? But I think it would be extremely important for Danish society to do some population screening. It should not have to be expensive. It should not take a long time. You have the talent there in your universities, and you should simply tell them it's going to be much easier for you to convince the Danish people to support academic research better than they do today. If they can show when something like this happens, they can step up to the plate and help.
Well, just to comment on that, I mean, in Denmark, we have only one thing that has consistently been tested and that we can lean on is really the amount of people who get hospitalized with a lab-confirmed coronavirus. And that's the only thing we can look at. We have never at any point in this epidemic tested systematically in people who had fever and cough, for example, or anything like that.
Jesus. You see, Iceland was a colony to Denmark for 500 years. It's a lot to me to express sympathy for the Danes, but I'm trying to do it now. I'm just joking. I love you guys.
Okay.
But may I just ask you one thing? When I was reading it's of course easier to control an epidemic disease on an island than in a country like Denmark, and also in a smaller island will be easier than a bigger island. So there's some of that. But what do you actually do with the people who fly into Iceland? Do you quarantine them in 14 days regardless of test results or without testing? Is that right?
I want to correct you on another thing. Listen to me, we are relatively few of us. So it takes relatively little to control this in Iceland. But we have very little resources compared to what you have. And there is theoretically no more difficult to control this in Denmark than it is in Iceland. You only need to do the right things. You need to do the screen. You need to do the contact tracking, and you need to use quarantine. And you haven't done it. That's all. And yes, when people come to Iceland now, be the Icelanders or anyone else, they are put in quarantine for 14 days. And the reason for that is, the reason has been that you cannot trust the test when they're coming into the country, because they may be very, very early on in the infection. But there are all kinds of other things that make me concerned. You know, the way in which the international guidelines in the use of these tests doesn't make a complete sense. And I'm not going to go into the details of it, but we need to re-examine the way in which the tests are done based on results that we have. And we are rigorously analyzing it now. And the fact of the matter is that the criteria for positivity are too tight. In the PCR, they use 3 probes, and 2 of them have to be positive in less than 37 cycles of light. And actually, those who are positive just with 1 probe, they are infected. We have data to show that, because we have tested now on the east coast of Iceland, and we have tested 2,000 people, and there is no one infected. And in that region, there are no ambiguous tests. There are no tests that come up positive with 1 probe. All right? And we have shown that there is a linear correlation between the number of tests that come out positive in a region and the number of those who are ambiguous. There are direct, there is a almost complete correlation between it. So that means that we will have to re-examine the test results coming out of the PCR-based diagnostics, and it doesn't come.
I just want to ask you one last question. Is how do you see the future? You're really managing to control this pandemic really well, and you don't have lots of immunity building up. What do you think will happen over the next years in Iceland?
You see, I have difficult enough time figuring out what's going to happen today, and you're asking about the future. It's complicated. I think that we will release the restrictions on the moment of people gradually, and this infection is going to persist during that time, and we have to assume that a much larger percentage of the population will get infected. And let's just hope that we have the wisdom to maintain the protection of those vulnerable for a long time. The people in the old folks' homes and nursing homes and the elderly and the sick, and so it's going to be complicated. And I think it is inevitable that our healthcare systems are going to change dramatically because of this epidemic. And the rest of society is, of course, going to change also. Our habits are going to change. Weekend trips to London are going to become rare. We are not going to be, scurrying around the world as swiftly and as easily as we used to do. So this virus has...
It's teaching us a thing or two.
It's teaching us a thing or two, but also keep in mind that this epidemic, at least in Iceland, has brought us much closer together. And I think that we are going to end up less materialistic society. I think that we are going to come out as a more close-knit society and a better society from my point of view.
Okay, I will just ask Lone, I will ask you one thing. Because Kai, maybe you doesn't know it, but Lone is maybe one of the #1 scientists in Denmark. One of the most listened to in Denmark in the media. And Lone, we hear here from Iceland something that you have opposed in some of our other shows. That it is bullshit to say that we cannot isolate, quarantine, and test a lot more. We have Mr. Stefansson here that says that the mortality is 0.4. You said 0.1%, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. And he has, Mr. Stefansson here, this other perspective on the virus that we have discussed so many times.
I have to intervene.
Yeah, sure.
You see, you're not going to get me to say that Lone is wrong in any way, form, or shape. We are sitting here, we are looking a beast in the eyes that we have never seen before. We are, all of us, try to sort of figure out how to deal with this. And this is an experiment where the end is one. We have just one opportunity to test this, right? And when Lone said, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that it would go one way, and I said it would go another way, and let's say that I was correct, this is going to move in this way, that's not necessarily because I was correct on the basis of the premises we had. Remember the second law of classical logic. is that you can arrive at the right conclusion on the basis of wrong premises, all right? So everyone is trying to do their best, all right?
Yeah, all right. But then let me interrupt you.
But one thing I want to emphasize that if we are going to avoid the rapid formation of herd immunity that is going to come with a very high price when it comes to lives lost. If you're going to avoid that, there's no question that if we can get, R0 below 2, if we can get it below 1, meaning that each person infected is going to infect on average, less than one person, then we have at least achieved a state where this infection is going to decrease slowly in our society, and I think that's very important.
We have
no, but let me just interrupt. No, I'm sorry, but I just want to make this point. Because we need to choose a direction in society what to do. Do we choose the direction that Lone has argued to do before, step on the speeder a little bit to get more people infected because we need to reach 60%? Or do we take your approach, Mr. Stefansson? And I know that this is a learning process and all that, but maybe, I just want to know, and I think all the viewers would like to know, what should we do? Which strategy should we take here? So I'm asking Lone. Lone, is Mr. Stefansson right or wrong? And if you mean that he is wrong, where is he wrong?
Well, I think that this strategy is beautifully applied in Iceland, and it requires a lot of testing, and it requires a small population, and it requires and not a huge amount of people traveling in every day, because where are you going to put all these people if they have to be in quarantine? I think that the difference in our thinking maybe is that I'm thinking there's a spectrum of pandemic threats. There are the SARS and Ebola-like threats in which you can track and contain. We've seen that in 2003 and 2014, this can be done. But this particular virus here reminds me more of all the influenza pandemics we've ever seen. And nobody would try this strategy on that one because for the reason that we have to get to the other side of it. In my optic, it doesn't stop before, say, 50% of everybody has gotten the immunity. Otherwise, you'd have to keep on doing these things over and over again every year. And this is my question to you. Where do you see the end game here? Is it like a band-aid you're trying to pull off? Should you do it fast or slow or super slow as in Iceland?
There is a fundamental flaw in your logic, all right?
Bring it.
And the flaw lies in the fact that the population there's an enormous diversity in the way in which the population responds to the virus. When you're saying we are just going to try to achieve this herd immunity quickly, the rest of it just doesn't make much sense, is simply by accepting that you're going to let a very large number of old people and people who have underlying diseases die. The decision to achieve herd immunity quickly is basically a decision to say, I accept that these people are going to die. I do not accept that under any circumstances. And we should not accept that. We should do our best to make sure that as few people will die as possible. And by taking the approach that I'm talking about in Denmark, you could definitely decrease the spread of the virus. You could perhaps not contain it as quickly as we, but you could definitely contain it somewhat, and you can keep it from the people who are particularly vulnerable. There's going to be costs to society, but we have always accepted that there are costs involved with keeping those sick and vulnerable alive.
Yeah.
And you cannot take SARS and Ebola. They are basically epidemics that control themselves because they kill most of the people that they infect. And in that way, they contain themselves.
May I just return to the point about that if when you have, as in all our historical experience with epidemics and pandemics, pandemic influenza A in particular, we can see that the population had to get to a certain level of immunity, and then the virus became a seasonal pathogen, and caused seasonal epidemics. We've seen that time and over again the last 100 of years. Why would it be any different? And how do you see actually that there would be fewer deaths in Iceland if you just stretch them out over a longer time, or is it just that you give them more time to live before this happens, which will happen because you have to get to a certain level of immunity for this to
happen? You can achieve the immunity in those who are more healthy, are less likely to die from the virus. That is basically the goal. You're hoping that you're working towards having most of those 60% people who can take this virus. And besides that, I am fairly optimistic that within a year, before the middle of next year, we will have a vaccine that can be used, right? And I think there is no reason to expect that we will not. There are already vaccines in clinical trials. And there's nothing about this virus that looks like it is going to make it complicated to make a vaccine against it. So I think that this approach to just let the shit hit the fan at this moment, and let's just these people die, I do not accept that. It's a ridiculously defeatist approach. And I'm absolutely convinced that Lone is a woman with a big warm heart. He doesn't want to see these things happen.
Look, if there's one country that has been hung out for having that strategy, it would have to be Sweden. Is that the country you're thinking about?
You see,
you have to talk this about Denmark, not defend what we've done here. Anything? Maybe I am, but we managed to, by all the things that we've done, which has cost the economy and everything we had, and old people's happiness and loneliness and what have you, we have managed to get this not down to 0.7 or something like that. Not so bad.
I think that you see, I think that the Swedes took an extremely tough approach to this. I mean, they basically decided that this was what they wanted to do, and they stuck to it. And I just hope that they will not have to pay too high of a price for it. But as I said before, we were all of us a few weeks back, we were looking at something that we didn't understand at all, basically, or understand very little. And people sat down and they put this in all kinds of context. Lone, you put it in your context, and the Swedes put it in another context, and we just put it into a third context. And I'm not saying that we were right and you were wrong, but I'm just the only aspect of this I do not accept easily is the acceptance of this high death toll if you don't try to contain the virus.
But we don't try to contain the virus. We have done nothing but try to contain the virus in Denmark.
I know. Well, Lone, I wasn't pointing a finger at anyone. I was just saying that we all of us have been trying to do our best, trying to figure out what this beast is going to do, all right? And we are gradually, as we work on this, beginning to learn more and more about the nature of this virus. And hopefully it will help us to contain it and get rid of this, and get into a new brave world that's going to look different from the world we lived in before we went into this epidemic.
We have a great suggestion from one of our listening. Get this.
Yeah. Could we not make Denmark a part of Iceland? Do you know that this guy Lone is asking a lot of questions all the time, and he's actually a professor in astrophysics. Yeah, yes. Well, anyways. All right. You know, we've been chatting for so long now, and so should we take a question, or do you have 5 minutes, Mr. Stefansson, or do you need to get on?
Let's. What time is it?
It's 10 minutes to.
I have 5 minutes more.
You have 5 minutes more? Okay, let's find one here. Why should it be impossible to keep up the Icelandic model in Denmark until we hopefully have a vaccine? Why should it be impossible?
That's a question for Lone.
Yeah. Okay, so let's look at what happened. If I look at the graphs on your website, I see that a whole lot of Icelandics were in quarantine so far. How many was it? Like 5 to 10% of the entire population was in quarantine? Isolated.
4 to 5% 4 to 5%.
4 to 5%. And they are isolated from their families?
4 to 5% have at one point in time or another been in quarantine. All right?
Alone or with their families?
We are counting all of them. We are not just counting the families, but if you count the numbers, it has made up to 4% of the population if you add it all up together. Yes.
Right.
And so what?
Okay, so my next question is what happens? What really bothers me most about that strategy is that so many people have asymptomatic disease or mild disease. How are you going to catch them? Just as contacts of the known cases that have symptoms, or how do you go about that?
How do you catch the people who are asymptomatic? You do it by doing population screen. All right.
But you only screen 10%, so you so far missed potentially 90% of the cases if there's just random.
That's absolutely correct. But the way in which this works is that the infected individuals do not have a random distribution in society. When you catch one and you take the contact, you get a fairly large number of individuals because these are uncontained individuals. So the R0 is usually far above 2. So this is a fairly effective way in finding the pockets of infected, because that's how you find them. They're usually a group of people, and we actually in the paper that will be published this afternoon or this evening, it has, for example, a picture where we are matching the haplotypes that come out of the sequencing with the contact tracing, which shows that the spread to the virus is in fairly tight group of people. So by doing the population screen, you're going to find a lot of individuals who are infected.
Okay, Mr. Kai, there's a question here from Jens, and this is a difference between Denmark and Iceland. Jens says, there are tens of thousands crossing the Danish border to Sweden and Germany to work. How can you handle that in the Icelandic model?
Yeah, we have an airport through which 7 million people come each year. Of course, we're going to have significant problem with that when we come out of this. And this is, of course, if you're going to do this, you will have to be fairly focused, or you have to be fairly energetic in screening people, even the people who are going back and forth. And you have to have your public health authorities being aware of this crossing of the border to Germany, where these people are going and how the state is, and or how the distribution of the virus is in the places where they go to work. There is no cheating on that. I mean, the fact that they are crossing the border for work requires that you be more vigilant, spend more energy on monitoring these people. I mean, we are going to bring our people at DECO to work fairly early on, but we are going to do it by screening them every week. So we can allow ourselves more contact, more proximity by being very active in using modern technology to monitor.
But it seems to me you overcome the problem that I'm stating, which is that there's asymptomatics, there's presymptomatics, there's mild disease. It's hard to find out who is sick. You have done it so far by putting everybody in quarantine who enters the country. And that would be hard in our situation with so many people crossing. They would not be able to work here, regardless of their testing status.
Yeah, right. That's the price you have to pay for containing this. I mean, you're not going to go back. If you're going to contain this in any way, form, or shape, you're not going to come back to exactly the same pattern of living as we had before the epidemic. But I have to go to to attend to some other things. It has been a pleasure to talk to people sitting in the former capital of Iceland.
Yeah. And we salute the colony, and we will maybe we'll get you back someday.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye. Okay, Lone, tak for i dag. Det tog alt for lang tid. Hold kæft.
Det gjorde det. Det var virkelig spændende, mand.
Var det ikke?
Jo, det var det.
Ja.
Jeg føler stadig, at jeg ikke forstår, hvad deres endgame er, men det er måske meget mig.
Ja, man siger jo, at han regner jo lidt med, at vaccinen kommer om et år, siger
Ja,
han.
det er rigtigt. Det kunne man jo sige. Hvis
det
man,
var jo
der
ikke
er noget imod på, man får sygdom, eller man venter til man har en vaccine om 18 måneder eller sådan noget.
Ja. Okay, Lone, have det rigtig godt. Ikke?
I lige måde.
Ja, okay, vi ses.
Ja.
Hej.